Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of PYA Crew Spotlight. My name is Ria. I am your host, and I'm very pleased to welcome this week's guest, Chef Sheree Murray. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm doing really well, thanks. So good to be back here on the island.
Yeah, well, you just got back. I mean, you were sort of doing a bit of freelance here and there. And when it comes to the story of the golden handcuffs, you definitely sort of fell back into that because you didn't want to go back to yachting on a full-time basis. And you got this great gig out of the US and off you went. And it actually morphed into something more than the short period of time that it was going to and ended up being about a year, no?
Yeah, 7 months. The time just flew. And I've got to say the golden handcuffs got me good, but it was all a choice. You know, I had the choice to stay or to go, but I just remembered how much I loved like yachting. Like I kind of fell in love with it all over again after having, you know, I've had 3 years off freelancing, and most of my freelancing was cooking at villas. So I hadn't worked on a boat in 3 years, let alone done charters. So, you know, it was a way to escape the winter. I couldn't go home to New Zealand for Christmas. I wasn't a fan of staying here on the island. A friend rang me up and said, we need a chef now. And I was like, you know what? This is exactly what I've asked for, a way out of Mallorca. I've got to take it. And yeah, it was meant to be three months. It ended up being 7.
Well, I think the important thing is you enjoyed it. So you know what, that's what it's all about in the end. Let's take you back a little bit. What actually got you into yachting in the first place?
So I love this story because it all just came up so naturally. I had no idea super yachting even existed. I was a chef in restaurants, you know, I'm culinary trained, never heard of yachting. I'd never even been on a boat. I never knew anything about sailing. And it was back in Australia. I was working in the Whitsundays on an island called Daydream Island. And there's a lot of sail yachts there. And I had a chef friend that had left the island to go work on a private motor yacht, like a small one, probably, I think it was about 20 meters. And he was telling me about it. And I was like, what a cool way to do chefing, you know, to get out of the restaurants, to get out of the chalets. It opened up a whole new world. So my time on Daydream Island was coming to an end. So back in the day, there were no crew agents. I looked in the local newspaper for Airlie Beach, and lo and behold, there was a job for a chef on a 3-masted schooner going out of the Whitsundays. So I applied and got it. And it was as simple as that, just hearing about the industry. Of course, I had to get a sea safety certificate. It's a little bit simpler when it's the smaller boats in Australia. And yeah, like less than a month later, I was on a boat, just sailing around the Whitsundays.
So what is it about yachting for you as a chef that sort of is more rewarding than being a chef on land?
Oof. You get to go to so many different places and play around with so many different cuisines and so many different meats, produce, you know, from the Caribbean to the Med, it's so different. From the South Pacific to the Med, it's so different. And being able to go to local markets and explore the produce and the meat and talk to the vendors and the farmers and discover new things that I'd never even heard about, things we don't have in Australia or New Zealand. That is so much more special than working in a kitchen, you know, getting to explore.
And so for you, if there are chefs out there and they are considering, or even, you know, people that are just interested in cooking, what kind of advice that would you give them to sort of make their way into the super yacht industry? You know, what should they prepare for? What types of courses should they take? And once they get there, what will make them that super yacht chef as opposed to the chef that works in a kitchen on land?
Yeah. So if they were already culinary trained, then all you need is your ENG1, your STCW 10, now they call it. I did it when it was still 9.5. Those 2 certificates are a given. You have to have them. You also need, if you're going to go on to, I was just on a 60-meter motor yacht, so I needed my security certificate. So make sure you have that proficiency in security awareness. Those are the 3 main ones if you're qualified. And if you're not, then you'd need those 3 tickets. Plus, I would do some culinary training, get to know the basics. There's things we learn in restaurants, especially when it comes to mise en place, that absolutely save me when I'm in yachting. I know what I can pre-prep and what I can't. You know, I know what can be frozen down. I've worked in some really big kitchens where we're serving 600 people. So I know how to prep for large amounts of people and small amounts of people. So if you're not a qualified chef, maybe go do a little stage in a restaurant somewhere, get familiar with all the basics, or go do, I hear a lot of good things about the Ashburton cookery course. They do entry level, something like that. And just for chefs in general, going from, my biggest thing, and I think I've said this like 1,000 times in the last 6 months to different people, is going from kitchens to boats. You kind of got to drop the chef ego. And I'll hand on heart say I had a chef ego, and sometimes she still creeps back in, but it's not all about you. It's all about working as a team, especially if you're on a sail yacht. You're going to have to learn to fly by the seat of your pants. It's more about sailing on a sailboat than it is, the food does come a really close second, of course, but you're going to have to learn to be adaptable. That was my biggest learning curve when I went from a restaurant to working on a yacht, is I had to be adaptable. You know, if there were brulees in the oven and we were going sailing, the captain doesn't care about that. They care about the sailing. So make sure you're communicating with everyone, you know, communicating with the captain, your chief officer, the bosun, whoever, you know, depending on what size boat you're on. Make sure you're communicating about what's happening that day, so you can do your prep around sailing, or if you're on a motor yacht, around moving. And just drop the chef ego, because you're going to be working in a tight-knit environment, and there's really not time for egos and for.
Well, you know what, you know, it's interesting you talk about egos, because a lot of different positions that I've talked to in doing this series is that when you first get into yachting, people recommend that you get into on a smaller yacht, because that gives you more chance to really sort of get your sea legs, as it were. If you're coming out of a professional kitchen, would you suggest a smaller yacht, or going straight into the bigger super yachts?
You know what? I started on 33 meters, and I actually quite liked that, because, you know, you're chefing by yourself, you're cooking by yourself. Maybe you have a galley hand tops, but it's quite easy to work in a small space when it's just you. But if you don't, but I never even knew what was possible on big motor yachts until just now. Now I would never go to a small boat. So it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking to transition from a restaurant into something that's similar to a restaurant, I would say go on a bigger boat, because I just came from a 60 meter that had 2 Rationale ovens, a deep fryer, 6 burners. It's the biggest galley I've ever worked in. It was like being in a commercial kitchen again. And if that's what you're after, yes. If you're not after the lifestyle of sailing and getting out on deck and learning the lines and learning how to sail, I would say go to a bigger boat, you know, 50 meters, 50 to 60 meters. But if you're into the idea and really passionate about learning about sailing, you want to be on deck, then by all means, go to a 30, 40 meter yacht and enjoy it. And that's why I went into yachting, first of all, was to learn about sailing. I wanted to be out of the galley.
Well, and something that I think we have to point out is, and perhaps you can describe it better than I can, I'm sure you can. What is the difference between a professional kitchen and a yacht galley?
Oh, a lot of the time it's the equipment and space. Those are the 2 main things. So fridge space is pretty dismal if you're on a smaller boat. Prep space can be quite small. You know, you're in a really confined environment, especially on like smaller 40 meter sail yachts. You don't always have like the Rationale combination ovens that we're used to in commercial kitchens. You don't always have a proper deep fryer. Sometimes you've only got like 4 burners when you're cooking for 10 people, and that's not including crew. So maybe like 16. So there is a difference when it comes to equipment, but I find a lot of boats now are really, you know, they were always really open to me buying like the fun stuff, like the dehydrators, the spiralizers, I know a lot of chefs now buying Thermomixes. I personally don't use them. They're like a robot to me, but I just don't get it. But I find a lot of the yachts now are getting that sort of equipment that you would have in a commercial kitchen, depending on the size. So a lot of the times the difference would be the space, and then the equipment isn't necessarily always going to be up to speed like you would have in a commercial kitchen.
I have to say, I was on a super yacht recently, and I was actually shocked. The galley was actually smaller than my apartment kitchen.
Oh, no way.
And it was tiny. And of course, they were pumping out food for, 10, 12 guests. And then, of course, they had crew of 6 to 8 people. And all that food had to come out, and it had to be 5-star quality. I mean, when those plates went out, everything had to be absolutely perfect. And the space was, to get 2 people into that galley was difficult.
Yeah, you have to learn to get really creative with your space when you're working on the smaller yachts. Like I dare say 20 to 30, sometimes 35 meters. You do have to get used to really be prepping tidy, which a lot of us in kitchens, that's a given. You have to be, otherwise you're constantly getting yelled at. But it's learning how to be super, super tidy and utilizing small spaces.
So would you recommend people to get into yachting?
No, 100%. And as I said, I would think about, when you're thinking about coming into yachting, what do you really want to get out of this industry? Do you want to be sailing and be called it? Because if you're on a sail yacht, especially I keep saying 40 meters because that's a lot of what I've done, you're going to be called out onto deck. You're going to have to help dock the boat. You're going to have to help, well, not even have to, you get to do this stuff. I've got to change my language there. You get to help put up the sails. And that is amazing. And I've learned so much over the last 13 years about sailing. If you don't want that, if you're not looking for that, then go on a big motor yacht. It's like working in a hotel. You're going to be doing crazy hours. You're going to have a nicer, bigger space. It really just depends on what you're after. But I definitely recommend everyone giving it a go and just having fun with it.
Well, thank you ever so much. How long have you been in yachting?
It'll be 14 years at the end of this year. So it's a long time. The last 3 have been freelance.
Nice. Well, you've definitely had a good run of it. And obviously, if you're still in love with it at this stage, then it is definitely a good career choice.
No, exactly. And what's great is having the choice to tap in and out.
Yeah. And that is a possibility, the longer that you're in the industry. And, we see it changing all the time. Right now, people do that quite often. There's rotation, there's, on a temporary basis coverage, it is a possibility. And I think as you get older too, the ability to have that freedom makes it so much more special.
Yeah, it's so nice. I must admit, I'm definitely enjoying having my time freedom back now.
Sheree, thank you ever so much for your time. It is very much appreciated. And we will provide your LinkedIn information underneath this interview if anybody wants to get a hold of you, because you are a wealth of information. And I'm sure you are more than happy to share that information with people if they so require.
100%. Absolutely. Anytime.
Once again, you've been listening to Chef Sheree Murray. You've been watching the PYA Crew Spotlight. My name is Ria. I've been your host. We'll see you again next week.